back, my fellow assassins, to another episode of the Dark Assassins Podcast, the show that dives deep into not just technology, but the concepts, software, and procedures behind it all, and explains it so simply that even your grandma can understand it. As always, I'm your host, the Dark Assassin. So it's another weekend, my fellow assassins, and you know what that means? That means more free time for more personal projects. So I hope that you got some personal projects lined up for this weekend. I have hopefully have a couple. I guess we'll see what happens as far as time goes, because as we all know how it goes with personal projects, you start some and then you're like, oh yeah, this won't take too long at all. And then 4 hours later, you're stuck on a bug and you don't know what happened and how you even got to this point. Because this was supposed to be a quick and easy, simple, no-nonsense project that you were going to knock out in no time. And then here you are hours later, still working on the same project. Or what'll happen is you'll be working on the project, you'll get it working, and then you're like, oh, this would be a cool feature to add. So then you go try to add that feature and you're like, oh, well, maybe if I can make it a little more robust and more resilient to not crashing due to errors. So then you add some error checking and error handling. And then before you know it, you got a full-blown piece of software that you programmed. And all you really set out to do was write a quick script to, query a database or query a website or something to pull information. And now you just spent, hours and hours and hours working on a simple project. But, it's all in good fun. We do it because we enjoy it. And at the end of the day, it's another project you could throw up on your GitHub, for example, and let employers see the good work that you do. And as we always say here on the Dark Assassins Podcast, experience is king, and personal projects are definitely an excellent way to get you some of that good experience. So without any further ado, let's get into this week's trivia question. So for this week, your trivia question is, what is the name of the program responsible for booting a computer? And you get bonus points if you can give me an example of one of those such programs that boots a computer. So that is your that is your trivia question for the week. Cybersecurity tip we'll get into in a little bit. But speaking of booting computers and operating systems and all that stuff, another pipe dream of mine as far as personal projects go is to write my own operating system one day, which, if you know anything about writing operating systems, that is let's just say quite the undertaking. When you're talking about Linux and Mac OS and Windows and, BSD and all these other operating systems out there. I mean, you're talking in the millions worth of lines of code. So it is no small project, obviously. But even if it's not like a full-fledged, Linux or Mac OS or Windows operating system, just to have something basic that can be flashed to a USB drive or something that you can plug in and boot up and mess around with and play with or something. I think that would be pretty cool. That's in my list of pipe dream projects. Also in that list of pipe dream projects is that virtual world type thing that I talked about, a couple episodes ago when we talked about the Tron Legacy movie and how I wanted to program my own virtual world type thing like there was in Tron. So I think the operating system kind of goes into that category. Although, to be fair, back in my undergrad days, I took an operating systems class, and to initially going into that class, I thought we were actually going to make our own operating system, so I was pretty excited for it. I guess as much as I could be excited for class, for school, but that didn't happen at all. The closest we got to it was we wrote like a super basic kernel that would boot up and just like essentially just print hello world to the screen. That's literally all it did. And the only way to stop it was to power off the computer. So if you like flashed it to a USB drive, which you could do, the only way that you could stop it or literally do anything was just to hold down the power button and shut the computer off. So yeah, but I mean, there was some like basic concepts there. And I did see like a tutorial series that someone had online about like building your own operating system. So I don't know, maybe someday it'll get added to the queue and I'll, get hooked on it for a while and try to make some progress. But, who knows what's going to happen? Who knows what the future holds? But I alluded to the cybersecurity tip, so let's get into this week's cybersecurity tip. So for this week's cybersecurity tip, we're going to go back to some ways that you can improve your privacy. And when it comes to your privacy online, one of the best things you can do to try to keep as much of your privacy as possible is to limit not only when, but where you use social media apps. Because as I'm pretty sure all of you are aware by now, social media makes their money by harvesting as much data from you as they can. And location data is some of that sweet, sweet honey, juicy nectar. I don't know, insert other adjective to explain something really good to these social media companies. It's like gold to them because if they know where you are, they can even better target you personalized ads, and they can even advertise things local to you, or they can advertise, places like if you went to a Starbucks coffee shop or a local coffee shop, or you went to a thrift store or wherever and you pulled out your phone and trolled around on some social media apps and they know that you were at one of those stores, maybe they'll start sending you ads for similar stores. So we already talked about way back in the early episodes of the podcast about how VPN companies are lying to you and why a VPN is not the silver bullet that's going to keep you anonymous online and keep all your data private, which, by the way, that's just straight up not true. Because like we mentioned in that episode, if you sign in to a social media app, for example, you're literally telling the whatever organization is running that app that you are you. So it doesn't matter if you're using a VPN or not. They still know that it's you. And the only thing that you're telling them is hey, by the way, I am not where I usually am. And depending on how you configure and use your VPN, they could almost instantly tell that you're using a VPN because, oh yeah, you just logged into our site 2 minutes ago from this IP address in Wisconsin, and then 2 seconds later, we have you, with the same cookie information and the same user agent and all this other good stuff, logging in from Switzerland. You obviously didn't travel to Switzerland in 2 seconds unless you somehow managed to do some like teleportation voodoo magic. And if you did manage to do that, you definitely have a billion with a B dollar technology there. at least. So you definitely got to get some patents and copyrights and licensing and all that good stuff to make your money, because people would pay a killing for something like that. But in all honesty, they know that you're using a VPN if you're signing in with a different IP address and you're telling them. Plus, if you're using one of the big VPN companies, a lot of organizations kind of know the IP addresses that they have, so it's pretty easy to tell if you're using a VPN, which is why if you try to use a streaming site like Netflix, for example, you'll if you're using a VPN from one of the big companies, there's a chance you'll get like a message pop up saying that like you're not allowed to stream because you're using a VPN, because they're trying to crack down on VPN usage for location lock content. So it's known that the blocks of IPs that are owned by these VPN companies. So it's pretty trivial for a social media company to just do a lookup of your IP and be like, oh, this is an IP from I don't know, NordVPN. So guess that you have NordVPN. Cool, more data that I can use. Plus, if they know you're using a VPN, then they can just sell you more targeted ads for VPNs. But yeah, so the thing with social media apps is, if you can, like, only use them, say, like, when you're at your house, for example, and, like, never use them anywhere else, that could be one potential way that you might be able to maybe try to prevent some snooping. But I mean, they do so much weird, spooky, nefarious stuff that, it's hard to get rid of all of the potentials for them, spying on you. But the less you use it in various locations, the better, because then they don't have the likelihood of them gathering a lot more location data on you is a lot lower. So yeah, that's your cybersecurity tip for the week. But actually, a better plan than limiting the amount of use you have for your social media would just not to have any at all. And to be quite honest with you, if I didn't already have a couple social media apps before, I'd say a few years ago, I probably would never even touch them. I'd probably stay away from them with probably at least a 50-foot pole, maybe 100-foot. Depends on how friendly I'm feeling that day. But they're just terrible. I mean, they're just bad. At this point, like, back in the day, they were they were at least kind of sort of oriented towards, like, connecting with your friends and stuff. But now it's just like, I see a post and then I see some ads, and then I see some sponsored posts, and then I see another post from one of my friends, and then a couple more ads and another sponsor post or two, and then here's another ad, and there's a friend's post. Oh, but here's some more ads, another like, it's all paid stuff. Like, it's just bad. And not to mention all the nefarious stuff they do as far as harvesting your data, which the funny thing is, going back to, I think it was last week's episode when we talked about the Zuck's plan for the subscription plan, the thing I find funny about the subscription plan for Facebook and Instagram, and I think Twitter also, it's in theirs too, is you're paying for the privilege to have this magical blue check mark, but you still have to, like, sit through all the ads and everything, and they still harvest all your data. So back in the day, it used to be you would pay the company so you wouldn't have your data harvested and wouldn't see ads. But now we're transitioning to, you get to see the ads and we harvest your data and you give us money. I mean, they're just rolling it in, with all the money they're making in from getting you to subscribe to their subscription service while also giving you ads and harvesting and selling your personal data. I mean, it's just a straight up win for these social media companies. But I mean, they got to make their investors happy. And in cases like, I think Facebook, like, they're not growing as big as they were when, they first got onto the scene. So they got to make money somehow. And obviously, the whole metaverse thing is a complete dumpster fire that they're just pouring billions of dollars into and not really getting any money from that, at least at the moment, which I find hilarious how badly it's going. But they got to make their money somehow to keep their investors happy so their stock doesn't keep tanking. And the only way to do that is to show they're making more money than they did last quarter or last year or whatever. So if they can squeeze even more money out of you, then, I mean, why not? But yeah, so honestly, the only reason that I use social media is just to keep up with like some friends and stuff. And honestly, I use it, I kid you not when I say this, like less than probably 10-15 minutes a day on average, less than that, if I even use it in a given day. Like, I just don't use it much at all. And I mean, I have some friends on there that, like, it's kind of cool to see what they've been up to, like, especially friends that have known since, like, middle school, high school, that kind of thing. Even going back to, like, elementary school, like, like, old friends that, like, I don't really necessarily talk to much anymore, but it's kind of cool to see what they've been up to. But that's basically all I use it for. I virtually never post anything on there, because they don't need any more data on me, and I try to limit the amount of data that I give to them. But yeah, that's really all you use it for. Now, some of you might be saying, wait a second, you're a software developer. How do you have friends? Software developers don't have friends. They don't have social lives, which you're right, which this actually might be a shock, but I actually do have some friends. And while it might be contrary to the stereotypical, I just hide in a dark room all day and click-clack away on my keyboard, and the sunlight makes me cringe and, like, have to cover my eyes, and I don't touch grass at all. It is quite the contrary, and I do enjoy going outside from time to time. But so with that out of the way, I think we should get into what nerdy stuff have I been up to this week. Now, I'm not going to lie to you guys. This week is probably, if not the lamest nerdy things, it's definitely up there in the lameness category. Now, part of that is due to the fact that I was traveling this week, so I didn't really have much time to do any nerdy things. But the larger reason was, you guys know how I've had issues with my router. It's been pretty much an ongoing saga at this point. Honestly, we might as well change the title of the podcast from the Dark Assassins podcast to How the Router Messed Up This Week, or something along those lines, because it's a recurring thing where it likes to not behave itself. Now, of course, it only likes to not behave when I need it to behave, right? It's like a pet, it's like a dog, it's like a small kid. When you tell them to do something, because you told them to do it, they're like, well, now I don't want to. I'm going to do the opposite. So that's basically what seems to be going on, because the past couple times that I've traveled, this router has gone kaput on me and decided it just doesn't want to work anymore and is just going to turn itself off. But it doesn't turn itself off. It just, like, completely, I don't know if it's like kernel panicking or what the heck it's doing, but it's not pingable. It's not like actually powered off, but it's just like completely frozen, crashed, whatever. So, which I guess to its credit, when it went out on me like over like Christmas and New Year's, that was because my house lost power and I didn't have the BIOS configured correctly, so it just stayed powered off when the power came back on. But since then, it's happened a couple of times where it'll just shut itself off for no apparent reason, and I want to use it. So I haven't checked the logs, which I probably really should do to try to see what's going on with it. But I figured I have two solutions to fix this problem. The first solution is just buy another computer, which, you know me, that's probably going to be the solution I end up going with. But in the meantime, before I ever get around to doing that, my plan, I think, going forward, because I'm kind of getting sick and tired of having to deal with this, is migrate that VM, my router specifically, because my router server, as you're probably aware, is a hypervisor in and of itself that runs my router VM and a Pi-hole instance. So I think my plan going forward is going to, whenever I like travel or something, migrate the router VM specifically onto one of my other hypervisors that is actually reliable and won't just randomly shut itself off. So that way I can actually have access to my home lab when I'm away from home, how just like, how it should be. So yeah, that's the plan going forward. So that was definitely a bummer for sure, because I was away from home, I even did all the setup. I even remembered to plug my Xserve in because I wanted to try out my backup script again and make sure like everything actually works and goes off without a hitch for once. And then when I'm chilling in my hotel room, I tried to connect to my home network through my VPN, and of course it just doesn't work. And I'm like, well, this is great. And of course it was like the first night I was there, so great timing, router, because you were working fine that day, and then when I leave is when you're like, well, time to stop working. That's always how it works, right? Computers, they always, when they work great, and when they don't work, they're a royal pain in the butt. So yeah, that was a little bit of a saga there, but that's not even like nerdy stuff I did, right? That's just something that happened that annoyed me. As far as nerdy stuff I did, because I didn't really have access to my home lab and I was traveling, really the only thing I did that was, I guess you could kind of consider nerdy, was I cheesed the heck out of some AI this week. So AI has been all in the headlines, and I just showed it how dumb it can be sometimes. So I actually got to play some video games, which I hadn't done in literally months. So it was definitely a lot of fun to get back to playing some video games. Specifically, I was playing some Pokemon Scarlet, which, pretty good game in my opinion. But anyway, I just totally exploited the AI programming and cheesed the heck out of them. So I guess a little bit of background for those who aren't super into Pokemon and how it works. So there's this concept of typing, and certain types are better against other types, or what we call like super effective, which basically means if you use a move that's super effective on another type, it'll do more damage than it normally would. And then similarly, it goes the other way. Some types are resistant or sometimes even immune to certain types. So if you use a move that's resisted, it'll do less damage than normal. So the AI was a fighting type specialist, I guess you could say, and I had a psychic type as my first Pokemon out. Now, we mentioned the whole super effective versus, resistant type thing. Psychic, if you're unaware, is super effective against fighting. So I obviously had the advantage here, but that's not how I cheesed the AI, because, that's just, simple, I have the upper hand because my type's better. But how I cheesed them was the Pokemon they started with knew a move called Sucker Punch. Now, Sucker Punch is a move that has priority, which means it goes first. So it doesn't matter if you're faster than them, they go first. And it's a dark type move, and dark is super effective against psychic. So they obviously were making the smart move here of using the dark type move that's super effective and will deal more damage against my psychic type. Now there's a catch, because Sucker Punch is great if the opponent is actually using an attacking move. So Sucker Punch only hits if the opponent is planning on attacking. So if I have a Pokemon out and I'm trying to use Sucker Punch on my opponent, if they're using some non-damaging move like Tail Whip or something that doesn't actually deal damage, Sucker Punch is going to fail. And the other thing with Sucker Punch is it only has 5 PP, which means it has five uses of it before you have to use either some kind of healing move to restore the PP or go to the Pokemon Center and heal your Pokemon. So because I know this, I put the cheese, I brought out the cheese, and I should have had some crackers, because there was, which I honestly probably wouldn't have even had enough crackers because of how much cheese there was. But basically, they tried to use Sucker Punch for 5 turns in a row. And for 5 turns in a row, it failed, because I decided to set up like crazy and go for 5 turns of Calm Mind, which boosts my special attack as well as my special defense. And because the majority of psychic moves, not all of them, but the majority of them use the special attack stat, and specifically my Pokemon was a special attacker and was going to be using a special attack type move, I'm basically just making myself invincible so I can just one-hit literally their entire team. And that's basically what I did. And by the way, keep in mind, the Pokemon that I was using was at least 5 or 6 levels under-leveled compared to the AI. So they're, trying their best to hit their Sucker Punch, and I'm just like, hey man, you're just gonna Sucker Punch? I'm just gonna keep Calm Minding. And then after the 5 turns are up, I decided to break out my broom and start sweeping. So that's what I did. I swept their entire team, which was pretty funny. So yeah, the AI just got totally cheesed. Which I will say though, the AI, for what it's worth, was at least initially making the smart move, because honestly that's what I would do if I was in their situation. If I had a single dark type move in Sucker Punch, I'd go for it. The problem is they kept going for it even when it wasn't working. Now, because you can obviously see, at least I can see, maybe because I'm a software developer, I can see how the programming of the logic was built in. There's one or two ways, actually. The first way is the most basic way, which is, do I have a move that's super effective that'll deal damage? I do? Okay, use that. The more complex way, which is kind of in the same vein, because generally, although not always, the super effective move will deal the most damage, would be, which move will deal the most damage against my opponent? Okay, use that one. So in either case, Sucker Punch was probably the highest damage dealing move, plus it was also super effective. So from the get-go, they're making the smart play, going for that move and taking out the psychic threat. So that's obviously a smart move. The problem is they weren't smart enough to recognize my strategy of setting up against them and just letting them use out all their PP and just stalling them out. Because an actual player would have been able to recognize the fact that they're trying to set up. Because if the roles were reversed and I was the person with the fighting type team and my opponent had the psychic type and I had Sucker Punch, obviously I'd go for Sucker Punch first turn. And then it doesn't work because they use Calm Mind. And I was like, okay, I'll give it one more shot. I go for it again, they use Calm Mind again. At this point, I know what they're doing. They're trying to set up and make me get rid of all my PP. So what am I going to do? I'm going to go for a different move that'll actually deal damage. Because at this point, they're just becoming a threat with how much they're stocking up their stats. So I need to take them out as soon as possible. And if they're just going to keep stockpiling stats, I'm going to be a goner. So what I would do is I would go for any move that would just deal damage. And this would do two things. One, it would deal damage, but two, it would see that it would tell them like, okay, I'm actually attacking them now, and try to bait them into going for an attacking move and start their sweep, and then I can go back to the Sucker Punch move and take them out. That would have been a smarter strategy, but obviously the AI wasn't programmed for that. So you can see, down to the AI's credit, there are levels to the AI when it comes to Pokemon games. You have like the idiot AI, which literally does nothing and just picks a random move every time. You have, this kind of AI, which will pick like a super effective move and just keep using that over and over again. And then you'll actually have like intelligent AI that I don't know if they're necessarily as good as like real people, but they'll make some actually smart plays. Like they'll do some setup. They'll try to like bait and switch you into doing stuff. Like they do make some smart moves from time to time on like once you get to like the higher ups, like when you get to like the Elite Four and Champion and stuff. But yeah, I just thought that was funny that I just absolutely annihilated them and just cheesed the heck out of them and just, brought out my brooms and just played them like a fiddle, really. It was quite funny, quite satisfying, and I enjoyed it quite a bit. So now, getting into the main topics of this episode, I mentioned I was doing traveling this week, and obviously, me sitting what am I going to do sitting in the car for a few hours traveling? Then think of ideas for a podcast episode. And as I was driving, I was listening to my tunes, as you do, and I had my music, like I normally do, had it on shuffle. Now, we can obviously debate what music's best, but after last week's hot takes, I think I'm gonna lay off on the best kind, what music's best, and you can just insert whatever your favorite music of choice is here. But I'm pretty sure everyone listening has probably used the shuffle feature, whether you have music on Spotify, Apple Music, whether you have your personal music library from CDs, whether you got it from Sailing the High Seas or some other means, or however you acquired your music library, you've probably used shuffle. And the point of shuffle is to not play all the songs in order. So like if say you have like a CD, for example, you have, or an album, I guess, if you don't know what CDs are, which if you don't, oh my goodness. But you have like an order list for the songs in the album, right? You have like 1 through, I don't know, 12, 13, however many songs are in the album. So without playing shuffle, it would start at the first song in the album and then go all the way down. So like if you were playing vinyl records, for example, you would, put it at like the very edge and then it would slowly work its way in and you'd play all the songs in sequence. Or if you had, songs in a playlist sorted by alphabetical order, it would start at the first one in alphabetical order and work its way down. So that's not using shuffle. Using shuffle kind of mixes everything up. But it got me thinking, how does shuffle actually work? Now, obviously, there's a couple ways to look at it, and the most basic version of shuffle is just completely random. You figure out how many songs you're trying to shuffle and set that as your max number, and then you just, random number generate, pick a random number and, put them in a random order. That's the most basic version of shuffle. But I don't know about you. Maybe it's like a confirmation bias type thing, but I have had some experiences with shuffling my music where I'll get one song and then the next song is like, so I'll get a song that's just a straight up banger, right? And the next song is another straight up banger. And then it's like a constant, like all these songs, like you'll get like a few in a row that are like really good back to back and they're kind of similar to each other. And you kind of think like, man, is like my phone reading my mind or something? So there's a couple things that I could think of my interpretation of how you could implement a shuffle feature. So obviously, like we mentioned, the first one is just straight pseudo-random, or just straight random number generate and put them in a random order. Another version would be like a pseudo-random type thing. Well, yes, you put them in a random order, you do it a little more methodically. So, for example, if you randomly selected a song and it was, say, a rock song, then you have like you could do like either a heuristic, which is basically like an educated guess type thing, or you have a higher probability, or whatever the case may be, of putting a song of a similar genre as the next song. So that would basically mean like, because I know, at least personally for me, I have a couple different, genres of music that I listen to. And one thing I kind of noticed is it doesn't seem like, it's completely random, in the sense that, like, say I'll have, a rock song, then a country song, or, a pop song, or a dance song, or rap, or whatever the case may be. Insert your music variety of choice. It's like a stream of like, 5, 6, 7 in a row of like the same genre, and then maybe it switches to something else, and then it'll be like a few songs of that genre, and then it'll go to something else. So that could potentially be a way that it shuffles. It kind of like, picks some that are similar in the sense of their genre. And then an even more complex version of that is you do some kind with, specifically on like iPhones and stuff, they got like the neural engine in there where you get basically like hardware to do machine learning stuff. So you could even use like a machine learning algorithm to like analyze the music in your playlist, or in the album, or whatever the case may be, whatever the type number of songs or collection of music that you're trying to shuffle. Do like an analysis on the music and analyze what songs are similar to each other, and kind of order them that way, where you randomize it, but you randomize it in the way that like similar songs kind of play grouped together. So kind of like the pseudo-random way, in the sense that you play like songs of similar genres. But I don't know about you, but I know some songs that are like two different genres that are kind of more similar than like, two songs in the same genre. So potentially you could have an algorithm that shuffles it, by doing analysis and putting, similar songs together, kind of excluding genre from the picture, although maybe that's a component that plays into it. And that could potentially be, where you see the case of the first song was a banger, then it played another banger right after that, and then the third one was a hit, and then it's just hit after hit after hit after hit, and then the shuffle algorithm just does not miss. Now, again, I think that's probably just confirmation bias, because I think, but hey, actually, now that I thought about it, like we mentioned in the very beginning of the podcast, when we talked about personal projects, and sometimes you'll start with a super basic idea and then you just over-engineer the heck out of it, and then next thing you know, you're like hours or days into this project that should have only taken you like 20-30 minutes. That is basically shuffle here, right? Like, you have the most basic version, which is you just put all the songs in a random order, to now you're at the point where you're using machine learning to analyze every single song and then group them and put them in an order of grouping of how similar they are to the one before them. So personally, I don't think that's probably that likely, just because of, obviously, when you hit shuffle, like, all the songs are in order basically immediately. So having to do a machine learning analysis on all the songs that you have would be a little computationally expensive, even if you had like dedicated hardware on your device to do the, shuffling. So personally, I don't think the analyzing of the music to determine which song order it should be, personally, I don't think that's probably it. But I wouldn't be surprised if it is based on, like, if genre has a role to play in the shuffle algorithms that go into when you hit that shuffle button. So that was just something that I was pondering and thinking about in the few hours that I was sitting in the car this week driving for my travels while I was playing my music on shuffle. I was like, that could be an interesting topic for a podcast episode. So I decided to talk about it. Now, to wrap up this episode, I thought we could do kind of a lightning round of some news stories that have been kind of in the news that I found a little interesting. So usually I don't talk too much about various rumors and things, but this seems like a pretty sure thing, which is the Apple virtual reality headset thing, which I believe the name floating around is like the Reality Pro VR headset. Now this thing, as you might expect, being one, virtual reality, and two, being made by Apple, isn't going to be cheap. And the estimates are around like $3,000 for the Reality Pro headset, and then I think like down the line they're potentially making a more affordable version at around $1,500. So, half the price, but I mean $1,500 is still a quite large chunk of change, if you ask me. Now, the Reality Pro headset, in addition to being a virtual reality headset, there were some rumors that it was supposed to launch in like a spring event, but then it seems like Apple canceled that said spring event, and now it seems like it's going to be a WWDC type thing, which honestly, if you think about it, is the perfect place to release this kind of a thing, because it's going to be a brand new line, like a brand new product line, which means it's going to need apps to be developed for it, which what better way to get developers on board to develop apps for it than at the Worldwide Developers Conference to announce it. I think that's probably would make sense for the launch, or at least the announcement. Now, as far as the launch date, I don't think anyone has really nailed down a definitive, this is when you're going to be able to buy it and this is when you'll actually get it in hand, which shouldn't be a surprise, because it was the same thing when they announced, the new Macs with Apple Silicon, right? You need the developers on board to develop software for the product, because first-party software is fine and all, but it's limited to what it can do. Like, you want other apps and other things to be able to do other stuff, right? So if you don't have developers making apps for this, new headset, there's not going to be much incentive to buy it. So you're going to need at least some buffer room before you can disperse it and sell it to everyone and actually have a good amount of software out there for people to use. Now, personally, if we assume that it's going to be announced at DubDub in June, I potentially could see them saying coming, like, being one of their ambiguous, like, coming in the fall of this year, which basically translates to December time frame, which I don't know why they say fall when usually when they say fall it's like December, but whatever. I think that would be the earliest that it would come out, because there haven't been any leaks from, like, the supply chain aspect of it, which basically means that it's not in mass production yet. Like, they haven't really started producing these at scale, which means it's not going to be coming out, like, in a couple months, because they're usually, like, when the iPhone's, like, really getting into mass production, that's where you see a lot of leaks. And even like the MacBooks, before they're getting ready for a release, you'll see, like, leaks from the supply chain of this device, which that is why you kind of know that it's coming, because you have the supply chain which isn't regulated to the same strict non-disclosure agreements that, like, the Apple employees are, so they're able to leak this information out to the public, which is why I think Apple they don't get into this when they're going to release a new product like Apple Silicon, or this new headset, or even the iPhone when that first came out, or the Apple Watch. They announce it and then they say it's coming some X time in the future. And they do this for a couple reasons. One, if they're not mass producing it, and they're just keeping all, like, the production and prototyping and stuff basically in-house, it basically eliminates any kind of potential leaks to come out of what the product will look like before the launch. So that's off aspect number one. Aspect number two is kind of, we mentioned, you need the software support. Like, you can't launch a completely new product to the public and be like, yeah, you can buy it now, and then you buy it and it literally can't do anything because there's no software for it. So yeah, I think at the earliest, assuming this gets announced at DubDub, earliest we could see this is end of this year, potentially even sometime next year, but we shall see. Now, another story that I saw, which I try my best not to give any attention to this because of how much of a flaming dumpster fire it is, but the Chinese spyware, social media app, which, mind you, I'm using some very, very hefty air quotes on that, TikTok, which is, in my opinion, one of the worst apps ever created, is supposedly going to be adding time limits for their users, because so many people are wasting their lives and selling all their data to China that I guess they're being nice and trying to limit. I don't know. So basically what they're doing is they're setting a 60-minute usage limit for users under 18, and the prompt will suggest them to, let them know that they have reached their quote-unquote time limit, but then they can just simply enter their passcode and get more time. And then for those who are under 13, which in my opinion, no one under 13 should even be on so back in the day, I remember where there was like an age limit, right? That you actually had to be before you could even have a social media account. But I guess, that got all thrown away. But which I guess isn't super surprising given what TikTok is and what they strive to be. But we could spend an entire episode talking about how much of a dumpster fire and how terrible that app is. Which, by the way, I obviously don't have that app. I never plan on downloading it. And quite honestly, a lot of the stuff I see from it, I just don't get. I don't find funny. I just don't understand it. Now, there is some stuff that's funny, but I mean, if you have a broken clock, it's going to be right twice a day, right? Like, I mean, occasionally you're going to have something. But I don't know. Personally, cybersecurity tip number 2, y'all, don't use TikTok. Unless you want China knowing everything about you, then use it to your heart's content. It is beautiful, chef's kiss. So yeah. I don't understand, which is kind of weird because I don't know why they're maybe this is a ploy that they're trying to do, because they've also been in the news recently for I think the U.S. government passed some, or they were trying to pass something to like ban it from like congressional, like basically representatives like aren't able to use it, I think. And then I've also heard talks of them potentially trying to pass legislation to get the app banned. I know Trump, back when he was in office, tried to ban it. Which, for as terrible as it is, banning an app, I mean, that's its own separate, conversation. There's a lot that goes into that, and we obviously aren't going to get into that, and we don't have time to get into that. But that's a whole other conversation about banning it. Now, I have obviously mixed feelings about that, because on the one hand, I think the app is horrendous and terrible and should die and shouldn't exist. So from that aspect, like, heck yeah, ban the thing. But on the other hand, it's like banning apps and restricting what people can use. I mean, limiting freedom. So, yeah. So there's definitely a conflict there. It's kind of hard, but thankfully I don't make the policy. I'm just a guy. I'm just a code monkey. I just seclude myself in a closet and talk aimlessly into the void. But thankfully, there's someone on the other side of the void, which is you, listener of this episode. And then the last bit of tech news, which this actually came out a little while ago, was Twitter making SMS two-factor authentication exclusive to Twitter Blue users. So the Twitter Blue thing obviously being their paid subscription service. So the only way you get the inferior version of two-factor authentication is if you pay money, which I don't know how that's a benefit in any way, because as we talked on, I don't know if it was last episode or one of the recent episodes, we talked about, I don't think it was last episode, a few episodes ago, we talked about two-factor authentication and how SMS is arguably not the best when it comes to two-factor because of, the whole thing where someone could steal your phone number, or you could lose your phone, unable to transfer your number, whatever the case may be. There's it's not encrypted, many scenarios out there of why SMS isn't the best option when it comes to two-factor, yet the only way you can have the privilege of using an inferior version is if you pay Twitter money. So I don't know why that choice is made, but the thing that's weird is, like, you still can use two-factor. You just can't use SMS. You just have to use a authenticator app, which is objectively better than using SMS. Which, now, I think probably the reasoning is a normal person doesn't want to download an extra app, and they like the convenience of just getting a text message with their, 6-digit code or whatever. So maybe that's their attempt to try to get them to pay for the Twitter Blue subscription. But you still have the choice to use an authenticator app if you don't, or a security key or something, if you don't have the Twitter Blue. You just can't use SMS, which I don't know about you guys, which if you're following the cybersecurity tip I gave, you should be included. But I know for me, if there's an authenticator app option, I'm going with the authenticator app option, and I'm not using SMS. Now, there are, I think, a couple instances where I am still using SMS rather than an authenticator app, but that's only because, like, the authenticator app that they have is, like, a niche one that, like, I don't have. And personally, I don't want to have, like, 20 different authenticator apps that are literally only have one app on them. Especially on apps that, like, I don't really even use. So to me, there's not much point. Plus, I also make sure that all my passwords are super strong and secure. I mentioned episodes back of how I self-hosted my own Bitwarden instance, which is password manager. So I'm able to, generate super secure passwords that way. So I'm not too afraid of the couple apps that are still using SMS for authentication. But it is something to keep in mind, and I find rather interesting that Twitter decided to go this route of making the far inferior but potentially more convenient option relegated to the paid subscribers. But on the other hand, I'm not exactly sure how the implementation is different, but I know there are ways that you can have the authenticator app be even easier than a text message, because sometimes when I use an authenticator app, I'll have to go to the app and actually check what the code is and then enter the 6-digit code. But other times I'll just get a push notification that says, "Is this you?" I hit yes, and then it authenticates me right away. So I'm not sure as far as the software side on the back end, what, if that's what kind of level of integration that is. I'm not sure if that's a paid feature you have to do with the two-factor thing, or if that's just, a different code implementation, or what the deal is. But if you're using an app that uses two-factor that has, that second option where it just sends you a push notification, you hit yes, this is me, and then it approves you right away, that's even easier than using SMS because you don't have to even type in a code. And it's more secure. So, yeah, I don't know what Twitter's doing. I don't know what Elon's doing. I don't know if anyone knows what Twitter or Elon's doing, but I have to say, as I mentioned when we talked about the meme fest that was going on Twitter when the blue check marks first came about and everyone was getting them for memes and jokes, it's definitely kind of funny and fun to watch from afar when you have no skin in the game. That's for sure. So before we close out this episode, let's get back to our trivia question for the week. So this week's trivia question is, what is the name of the program responsible for booting a computer? And then, of course, the bonus points is if you can give me some examples of such programs that are responsible for booting a computer. Now, the name of this program is kind of hidden in the question itself. So the answer for this week's trivia question of what is the name of the program responsible for booting a computer is a bootloader. So if you said a bootloader, congratulations, you got this week's trivia question right. And bonus points for anyone that was able to correctly give an example of a bootloader. Some of the ones that I can come up with right now off the top of my head, for example, is the Grub. Grub's super common. Not all, but basically almost every Linux distro uses Grub. It's a great bootloader. OpenCore, similar to the OpenCore Legacy Patcher, I believe it uses OpenCore, and then OpenCore is also used for Hackintoshing also. If you're not familiar with Hackintoshing, it's basically you take our standard PC, regular computer, and then you hack it to run macOS, hence the name Hackintosh. But that seems like it's going to be dying as support for Intel Macs dwindles by the year, which I'm not sure about you guys, but I think Dub, as exciting as it's going to be as far as all the new software, it's probably going to be an absolute massacre and a slaughter of a lot more Intel Macs getting killed off. And then another bootloader example is just the Windows Boot Manager. So those are some of the examples. There's obviously a lot more than that. So congratulations for those of you who guessed bootloader, and for those that were able to give an example of a bootloader. So if you enjoyed this episode, I ask that you will leave it a rating and review and subscribe to the Dark Assassins podcast if you haven't done so already. Also be sure to share the podcast with a friend or family member. And if you have any questions about this episode, or you have any topics or questions you want me to answer in a future episode, feel free to shoot me an email at contact@darkassassinsinc.com. There's a link for that in the show notes below. Love hearing from you guys, like answering your questions. And that's going to do it for me in this episode of the Dark Assassins podcast. Until next time, my fellow assassins, remember, bull nothing equals true. If action not equal to null, return true. I'll see you next time on the Dark Assassins podcast.